Just 4 months after his legendary Belmont Stakes performance, the greatest racehorse the world had ever seen stepped onto a track for the last time. But this wasn't the Kentucky Derby. It wasn't even in America. It was on foreign soil, on unfamiliar turf, in brutal weather conditions, with a different jockey. And what happened that day was nothing short of remarkable. Today, I'm going to share 15 facts about that race, facts that reveal just how special this horse was, how much his connections cared about him, and why his final bow was the perfect ending to an impossible story. Some of these facts will surprise you, some will move you, and at least one of them, well, you'll see why they still talk about it 50 years later. If you're a racing fan, hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community that honors these legends and keeps their stories alive. Let's begin. Number 15. A somber farewell. The moment every great champion dreads eventually arrives. The end. For Secretariat, it came on that cold October day in Toronto. After the Canadian International, after the Winner's Circle celebrations, after the crowd finally dispersed, came the somber reality. As he was loaded into the van to be retired to stud, witnesses said something that still echoes through racing history. The great horse seemed to turn and look back at the crowd one last time, as if knowing his time on the track was over. Now, we can debate whether horses truly understand the finality of retirement, whether they grasp that they'll never race again, whether they miss the roar of the crowd and the thunder of hooves. But those who were there, grooms, handlers, fans who stayed until the very end, they swear they saw something in his eyes that day. Recognition, understanding, perhaps even sadness. Secretariat had spent his entire 3-year-old season in the spotlight. Every race was an event. Every appearance drew thousands. He'd become accustomed to the attention, the energy, the electricity that followed him everywhere. And now it was ending. Heavier somehow. Like everyone present understood they were closing a chapter, not just in one horse's life, but in racing history itself. The van doors closed, the engine started, and Secretariat left the racetrack for the final time. Not in defeat, not in disgrace, but as a champion who'd given everything he had and earned his rest. That backward glance, whether real or imagined by emotional witnesses, symbolized everything we feel when greatness retires. The bittersweet knowledge that we've witnessed something we'll never see again. It's why we still talk about that moment, why it still matters, because saying goodbye to legends never gets easier. That somber departure stands in stark contrast to his behavior just minutes earlier, because even in his final moments on the track, Secretariat was still, well, Secretariat. Number 14. A ham to the end. If you've studied Secretariat's career, you know he had a personality, a big one. He loved attention, loved the cameras, and loved the crowd. His grooms joked that he knew when photographers were around, that he'd literally pose, turn his head to show his best angle, and milk the moment for everything it was worth. And in his final Winner's Circle appearance, he did it again. Known for loving the spotlight, Secretariat was said to have posed for the camera while wearing a maple leaf garland, a tribute to his Canadian victory. Eddie Maple, his jockey that day, later recalled, "He stood there like he'd done it 1,000 times, head up, ears forward, looking right at the cameras. I swear that horse understood what was happening." The photographers loved him, they always had, because while some horses are skittish in the Winner's Circle, nervous around the crowds and cameras, Secretariat seemed to enjoy it. He'd stand perfectly still when needed, then he'd toss his head dramatically. Turn to face different angles to give them variety. A natural performer until the very end. There's something beautiful about that, about a champion who never lost the joy of the moment, who didn't become jaded or tired or indifferent to the celebration. From his first stakes win to his final victory, Secretariat played to the crowd, and the crowd loved him for it. That maple leaf garland, a wreath of autumn leaves signifying his Canadian conquest, became one of the iconic images from his career, not because of the flowers themselves, but because of how he wore them, like a king accepting tribute, like an athlete who understood exactly what he'd accomplished, like a horse who was, undeniably, a ham. And you know what? Racing needs horses with personality, horses that transcend being just fast animals and become characters in the sport's ongoing narrative. Secretariat had that from day one, and he never lost it. Even when the cameras stopped clicking and the crowd started leaving, reports say he lingered in that winner's circle, soaking it all in one final time, a performer knowing this was his last curtain call. Speaking of the crowd, they weren't just enthusiastic that day. They were absolutely electric, so much so that they did something that could only happen in a moment of pure racing hysteria. Number 13. Unforgettable spectator scene. Imagine this. You're at a horse race. The horses are coming down the home stretch. The race is still happening, still in progress, and people start running onto the track, not after the race, during it. That's what happened at Woodbine on October 28, 1973. The crowd at Woodbine was so electrified that many were running across the track to get a closer look as Secretariat entered the home stretch. Now, for context, this is absolutely forbidden. It's dangerous for the fans, dangerous for the horses, and could have resulted in a disqualification or worse, a serious accident. But in that moment, rational thought went out the window. People had traveled from across North America to see Secretariat one final time. They'd stood in the cold and rain for hours. They'd invested emotionally in this horse's story. And when he made his move on the backstretch, when he opened that massive lead, when it became clear this was going to be another Secretariat masterpiece, they couldn't help themselves. Security tried to hold them back. Track officials managed to keep the crowds just far enough away to avoid catastrophe, and Secretariat, focused on running, barely seemed to notice the chaos his presence had created. But think about what that moment represents. This horse had such an impact, generated such emotion, created such a connection with the public, that thousands of people simultaneously lost their inhibitions and just ran toward him. When's the last time you saw that happen at a sporting event? When's the last time an athlete, any athlete, inspired that kind of spontaneous, uncontrollable reaction? That's not just popularity. That's something deeper. That's a genuine emotional bond between the public and an athlete. And remember, this was his last race. These people knew they'd never see him compete again. This was their final chance to be in his presence while he did what he did better than anyone in history. So they ran. They broke the rules. They risked ejection from the track. Because some moments are worth it. Some athletes are worth it. Secretariat was worth it. The emotion was one thing, but this race also represented something very practical for Secretariat's connections, a final payday for a champion who'd already earned his keep many times over. Number 12, the final earnings. Let's talk money. Because while Secretariat's legacy transcends dollars and cents, the business of horse racing still comes down to earnings. With his victory in the Canadian International, Secretariat earned $92,775. That brought his lifetime earnings to $1,316,808, making him one of the highest paid horses in history at that time. Now, to put that in perspective for modern viewers, in 1973, that was an enormous sum. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about roughly $9.2 million in today's dollars. But here's the thing, Secretariat's value wasn't measured just in race purses. His stud fee was set at $190,000 per breeding, astronomical for the era. His syndication value before retirement was calculated at $6.08 million, about $42 million today. He was, quite literally, a walking gold mine. Penny Chenery, his owner, had taken significant financial risks to keep Meadow Stable operational after her father's death. The farm was in debt, the operation was struggling, and then came Secretariat. That $1.3 million in earnings, while impressive, was just the beginning. The syndication deal saved the farm. The breeding rights created generational wealth. The legacy attracted attention that benefited the entire operation for decades. But here's what I find remarkable about that final payday. Secretariat didn't need to race in the Canadian International. He'd already proven everything, already secured his Triple Crown, already set records that would stand for decades, already guaranteed his Hall of Fame induction and legendary status. The syndication was done. The stud career was waiting. The money was already in the bank. So why run one more race? Because Penny Chenery understood something important. Racing fans deserved a proper goodbye. Canadian racing fans, and specifically the people connected to trainer Lucien Laurin and jockey Ron Turcotte, deserved to see their hero one final time. That $92,775 was meaningful, but it wasn't necessary. The race was a gift, a farewell tour, a thank you to the sport that had embraced Secretariat and made him an international celebrity. And that speaks to something beautiful about the sport at its best. Yes, it's a business. Yes, money matters. Yes, horses are investments that need to generate returns. But sometimes, just sometimes, the decision transcends pure economics. Sometimes you run a horse one more time because it's the right thing to do, because the moment matters more than the margin, because saying goodbye properly is worth the risk. Secretariat could have been injured in that race, could have lost, tarnishing his perfect post-Triple Crown record, could have ended his career on a sour note. But Penny Chenery trusted her horse, trusted his team, trusted that this champion had one more performance left in him. And he delivered. $92,000 richer, yes, but infinitely richer in respect, admiration, and the knowledge that they'd done right by their champion and the fans who loved him. The money was nice. The victory was expected. But how Secretariat won that race, especially in the final stretch, revealed something about both the horse and his jockey that day. Number 11. A gentle ending. Eddie Maple faced a unique challenge that day. He was riding the greatest racehorse in the world in his final race, on an unfamiliar surface, in terrible conditions. No pressure, right? But what happened in the home stretch reveals both Maple's skill and Secretariat's remarkable focus. When the horse spotted the bright, glowing tote board in the distance, he did what many horses do. He started looking at it, distracted by the lights and movement. Maple hit him 3 times to keep him focused, and then the rest of the stretch run was just a hand ride. For those not familiar with racing terminology, a hand ride means the jockey is barely asking the horse to run. He's not whipping, not driving, not demanding maximum effort. He's essentially just steering. Think about that for a moment. This is Secretariat's final race. The pressure is on to send him out a winner. The crowd is going absolutely wild. The conditions are challenging, and Eddie Maple is so confident in the horse beneath him that he barely has to ask for more. Those 3 hits early in the stretch, that was just to say, hey, big fella, eyes front, job's not done yet. and Secretariat responded, "Oh, right, sorry, got distracted. Let's finish this." And then he just ran. No fuss, no drama, no need for the whip or aggressive encouragement. Pure, effortless dominance. That's the mark of a true champion, when the jockey's job becomes almost ceremonial, when the horse knows what to do and just does it, without needing to be convinced or coerced. Eddie Maple later said, "I'd never ridden a horse like that, where I felt like a passenger, not a pilot. He knew his job, he wanted to win. All I had to do was stay out of his way." It's a beautiful way to end a career, isn't it? Not straining and struggling and being pushed to the absolute limit. Not being whipped every stride to squeeze out one final effort. Just running, the way he was born to run, the way he loved to run. There's something poetic about a horse finishing his career on his own terms, not being asked for everything he has, not having to dig into reserves and find something extra. Just being allowed to do what comes naturally, with the confidence that his natural ability is more than enough. That's respect, from jockey to horse, from human to athlete. Eddie Maple could have driven Secretariat for a bigger margin, could have made it more dramatic, could have really shown off. But he didn't. He let the horse cruise home, comfortable and in command, enjoying his final moments of competition. A gentle ending for a gentle giant. That gentle finish was possible because of what happened earlier in the race, when Secretariat did what he always did, made his move and left everyone behind. Number 10. The final takeoff. Every great Secretariat race has the moment, the instant when he decides the race is over and everyone else is just finishing behind him. In the Belmont, it was when he opened daylight in the backstretch and just kept pulling away. In the Preakness, it was that explosive move around the turn that left everyone gasping. In the Canadian International, it happened on the backstretch of the inner turf course, 3/8 of a mile from home. Eddie Maple let Super Red loose, and the horse quickly opened a 12-length advantage. 12 lengths in a matter of seconds. Let me explain what that means for those less familiar with racing. A length is approximately 8 feet. 12 lengths is roughly 96 feet, nearly 100 feet of separation from the horse in second place, and he created that gap in the space of a few strides. This is what separated Secretariat from every other horse, this ability to access another gear that others simply didn't possess. Eddie Maple described it like this: "I asked him to go and it was like opening a throttle on a sports car. Instant response, instant power." The horse in second place just disappeared behind us. Think about that from a competitor's perspective. You're running your race, you're in position, you're feeling good about your chances, and then Secretariat decides to run, and you might as well be standing still. That's not just being faster. That's operating on a different level of performance entirely. That's being a physical outlier, a genetic anomaly, a once-in-a-century combination of power, efficiency, and will. One stride, you're racing. The next stride, you're watching someone run away from you at a speed that seems impossible. The horses behind Secretariat in the Canadian International were good horses, quality turf runners, experienced competitors, and they were powerless to respond. Here's what I find particularly remarkable. This was on turf. This was his first and only race on grass. The surface was soft from rain, the conditions were miserable, and he still found that explosive acceleration that defined his career. That tells you it wasn't just training or conditions or familiarity with dirt tracks. It was innate, fundamental, part of who he was as an athlete. You could have put Secretariat on any surface, in any conditions, anywhere in the world, and he would have found a way to run faster than everything else. That backstretch move in the Canadian International was his final takeoff, the last time he unleashed that devastating turn of speed that had made him famous, and it was just as breathtaking as all the others. 3/8 of a mile from home, Eddie Maple gave the signal. Secretariat responded. The race was over. All that remained was the formality of crossing the finish line. Engagement prompt. What's the greatest athletic move you've ever witnessed live? That moment where you knew you were seeing something special. That dominant performance in Canada wasn't random. It was the result of a deliberate choice by Secretariat's owner, a choice rooted in loyalty and respect. Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Secretariat's final race, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're dedicated to preserving these racing stories and sharing them with fans who truly appreciate the sport. Your support keeps us going. Now, let's talk about why this race happened in Canada in the first place. Number 9. A strategic nod to his team. Why Canada? Why Toronto? Why the Canadian International instead of a more lucrative race in the United States? The answer reveals everything you need to know about Penny Chenery's character and her respect for the team that made Secretariat's success possible. Owner Penny Chenery chose the Canadian International specifically to honor trainer Lucien Laurin and jockey Ron Turcotte, both of whom were Canadians. This wasn't about maximizing purse money. This wasn't about convenience or optimal racing conditions. This wasn't about what was easiest for Meadow Stable. This was about saying thank you. Lucien Laurin had been born in Quebec. He'd grown up in Canadian racing before making his mark in American thoroughbred circles. Training Secretariat was the culmination of a lifetime in the sport, and Penny wanted him to experience that glory on home soil one final time. Ron Turcotte, from New Brunswick, had ridden Secretariat through the Triple Crown. He'd been the pilot for those legendary performances, the human component of an equine-human partnership that created history. And though Turcotte couldn't ride in this final race due to a suspension, Penny made sure the location honored his heritage. Think about the alternative. There were big-money races in the States, the Jockey Club Gold Cup, high-profile events with larger purses and more American media attention. Penny could have chosen any of them. Could have maximized Secretariat's final earnings and kept everything domestic. Instead, she chose loyalty. She chose to recognize that success isn't individual, that champions are built by teams, that the people who work behind the scenes, trainers, jockeys, grooms, exercise riders, deserve recognition and respect. Running Secretariat in Canada meant extra logistics, crossing international borders with a horse, dealing with different racing regulations, coordinating with Woodbine officials, accepting potentially smaller crowds than a major U.S. venue might draw. But it meant Lucien Laurin could stand in a Canadian winner's circle with his champion one final time. It meant Canadian racing fans, who'd claimed Turcotte and Laurin as their own, could see Secretariat race on their soil. It meant the story came full circle, started by Canadians, triumphant in America, concluded in Canada. That's class. That's grace. That's understanding that racing is about more than just dollars and trophies. The racing world noticed. The jester was widely praised. Laurin was visibly emotional after the race, thanking Penny profusely for the honor. And Ron Turcotte, watching from the sidelines because of his suspension, later called it one of the most meaningful moments of my career, knowing Mrs. Chenery did that for us Canadians. In a sport that can sometimes feel purely transactional, horses as investments, races as profit opportunities, Penny Chenery reminded everyone that loyalty and gratitude matter, that the people who help you reach the top deserve to share the view, that saying thank you sometimes means crossing borders and making gestures that transcend business logic. Secretariat's final race was in Canada because the people who made him great were Canadians. It's that simple and that beautiful. Those gestures matter. Beautiful gesture aside, that race in Canada created one of the most iconic images in all of racing, an image that perfectly captured both the horse and the moment. Number 8, the tremendous machine image. There are certain sports photographs that transcend their moment, that become larger than the event they captured, that turn into symbols of excellence, power, and athletic perfection. For Secretariat, one of those images came from his final race. The lasting image of the race is Secretariat rounding the final turn with his chest heaving, blasting massive clouds of white breath into the freezing air. If you've never seen this footage, and if you have but haven't watched it recently, I need you to understand how viscerally powerful this image is. The day was brutally cold. The air temperature was in the low 40s, with wind chill making it feel even colder. Light snow mixing with freezing drizzle. And here's this massive chestnut horse, muscles rippling, running at speeds that seem impossible given the conditions, each breath exploding from his nostrils in huge white clouds that trail behind him like jet exhaust. It looks like he's breathing fire, like he's a mythological creature, not a flesh and blood animal. Charles Hatton, the renowned racing writer, had described Secretariat as a tremendous machine, and in that moment, rounding that final turn in the Canadian cold, you could see exactly what he meant. The power was visible, not just implied or assumed, actually visible in every stride, every breath, every movement. His chest expansion was enormous. His lungs were working at capacity, processing oxygen at rates that would make human endurance athletes weep with envy. And all of that internal machinery was made visible by the cold air, turning his breath into steam, creating a visual metaphor for the engine that drove him. Here's the science behind it. Secretariat's heart was famously enormous, estimated at 22 pounds, nearly 3 times the size of an average thoroughbred heart. But his lungs were proportionally massive as well. His entire respiratory system was optimized for oxygen intake and carbon dioxide expulsion at elite levels. When he ran hard, his body was performing at the absolute peak of equine physiology. And in the Canadian cold, every breath made that performance visible to the naked eye. It's one thing to know a horse is powerful. It's another thing to see the evidence with your own eyes, to watch the steam pouring from his nostrils and think, that's what greatness looks like. Photographers captured that image from multiple angles. Each one is stunning. Each one conveys the same message. This is an athlete operating at the absolute limits of what's possible. That image appeared in newspapers across North America the next day. It graced magazine covers. It became one of the defining photographs of Secretariat's career, not from the Triple Crown races with their perfect weather and massive crowds, from a cold, rainy day in Toronto, from his final race, from a moment when his body's machinery was rendered visible by atmospheric conditions. Sometimes the universe gifts us perfect metaphors, the internal made external, the invisible made visible, the concept of tremendous machine transformed into literal imagery. That's what the Canadian cold did for Secretariat's legacy. It let us see with our own eyes what made him so special. The power, the capacity, the sheer physical magnificence of an athlete performing at levels that push the boundaries of what we thought possible. That powerful image matched the powerful performance. But here's the crazy thing. Even in victory, even running away from the field, Secretariat wasn't giving everything he had. Number 7. 12-length dominance while being restrained. Let's talk about the final margin, 6.5 lengths. In most races, that would be considered a blowout, a dominant, authoritative victory that leaves no doubt about who the best horse was. But here's the detail that makes it truly remarkable. Despite being throttled down, literally restrained by his jockey in the final stretch, Secretariat still won by a massive 6.5 lengths. Remember what we discussed earlier? Eddie Maple barely asked him for effort in the stretch. 3 hits early to focus him, then just hands and steering the rest of the way. That 6.5 length margin, that was Secretariat cruising. Now, recall what happened on the backstretch. Secretariat had opened a 12-length lead at one point. 12 lengths! Then, when Eddie Maple asked him to ease off, when he let the horse coast home, the margin narrowed to 6.5. Think about what that means. Secretariat could have won by 12 lengths or more, could have created another historically massive margin, could have really put an exclamation point on his career. But he didn't need to, and more importantly, Eddie Maple didn't ask him to. This was a professional courtesy between jockey and horse, a recognition that the race was won, the point was made, and there was no reason to demand maximum effort. Why drive a champion unnecessarily? Why risk injury or strain from margins that don't matter? Why not let him finish comfortably, safely, with energy to spare? That's horsemanship. That's respect for the animal. That's understanding that winning is enough. You don't need to humiliate the opposition or shatter records every single time. But here's what kills me about this fact. Even while being throttled down, even while cruising, even while practically jogging compared to his capability, he still won by 6.5 lengths on turf, in terrible conditions, in his first race on grass. What would the margin have been if Eddie Maple had really asked? If he'd driven Secretariat like he had something to prove? 15 lengths? 20? We'll never know. And that's somehow perfect, because it leaves us with the eternal question that surrounds all great athletes. Just how good could they have been if they'd been fully extended every time? Secretariat didn't need to answer that question. The 6.5 lengths, achieved while cruising, told everyone everything they needed to know. He was better, significantly better, obviously better, and he won while making it look easy. There's something almost casual about it, like a professional athlete going through a warm-up and accidentally breaking records because their easy pace is still faster than everyone else's maximum effort. That's the difference between good and great, between champion and legend. Good horses have to work for every victory. Great horses win while being restrained. Secretariat's final race was a perfect example of the latter. That ease of victory came from something Eddie Maple discovered immediately. Riding Secretariat was unlike riding any other horse he'd ever been on. Number 6. Just a cluck. Eddie Maple was a top-tier jockey. He'd ridden hundreds of horses, won major stakes races, knew how to communicate with equine athletes and extract their best performances. And then he rode Secretariat. His description of that experience tells you everything. Jockey Eddie Maple didn't have to urge Secretariat much. He simply clucked to him to increase his pace, and the horse responded like thunder unchained. Thunder unchained. What a phrase! Let me explain what a cluck is for viewers unfamiliar with horse racing. It's a subtle sound jockeys make, a clicking noise with their tongue, to signal a horse to increase effort or attention. It's gentle, it's minimal, it's the lightest form of encouragement a jockey can give. And that's all Secretariat needed. Eddie Maple later elaborated, "I'd ridden stakes horses who needed constant reminders, who needed the whip, needed urging, needed you to convince them to run harder. With Secretariat, I clucked once, and it was like flipping a switch, like activating something that had been waiting to be released. The acceleration was instantaneous. The power was overwhelming. I went from, 'we're doing well,' to, 'oh my God,' in the span of 2 strides. Think about that from a jockey's perspective. Your job is to communicate with a 1,000-pound animal traveling at 40 miles per hour, convincing them to run faster, faster, and faster. With most horses, that's a negotiation, a constant conversation, a back and forth where you ask and they decide how much to give. With Secretariat, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a trigger. Cluck, boom, Thunder Unchained. Thunder Unchained is such a perfect description because it captures both elements, the power, thunder, and the sudden release, unchained. Like that power had been there all along, contained, controlled, waiting, and the cluck was simply the key that unlocked it. Eddie Maple said he'd never felt anything like it before or after. That sense of sitting on something so powerful, so willing, so capable, that your job as jockey becomes almost redundant. Your role shifts from persuader to passenger, from driver to passenger, from active participant to someone just trying to stay balanced while this incredible athlete does what he was born to do. It's the dream, right? The fantasy every jockey has, to ride a horse so talented, so eager, so naturally gifted that the partnership becomes effortless. Eddie Maple got that experience exactly once in his career, for one race, Secretariat's final race, and he's never forgotten it. Decades later, asked about that day, Maple still gets emotional, still struggles to adequately describe what it felt like. "How do you explain to someone what it's like to ride perfection?" he asked in one interview. "What words capture that feeling?" Thunder Unchained, that's pretty close. The other jockeys in that race never had a chance, not because they weren't talented or their horses weren't trying, but because Eddie Maple had a horse that responded to a cluck like other horses respond to a whip, that operated on a different level of sensitivity, awareness, and athletic capacity. One cluck, Thunder Unchained, race over. That responsive power was impressive, but what made it even more remarkable was the surface he was displaying it on, a surface completely unfamiliar to him. Number 5, a tremendous machine on turf. Here's something that gets overlooked in the mythology of Secretariat. He was a dirt horse. His entire Triple Crown campaign, Kentucky Derby, Preakness, Belmont Stakes, all run on dirt. His training regimen, dirt tracks. His comfort zone, dirt. And then, for his final race, they asked him to run on turf, on grass, on a surface he'd never competed on before. Despite the unfamiliar, soggy turf, Secretariat demonstrated his unmatched power, taking the lead on the backstretch and leaving the field behind with ease. Now, you might think, what's the big deal? Grass, dirt, it's all just ground, right? Wrong. Turf and dirt are completely different surfaces that require different biomechanics, different stride patterns, different footing awareness. Dirt is firm when properly maintained, provides consistent traction, and allows for explosive starts and powerful push-offs. Turf is softer, can be slippery when wet, requires more careful foot placement, and doesn't provide the same explosive launch capability. Many horses excel on one surface and struggle on the other. It's why there are turf specialists and dirt specialists in racing. Changing surfaces is like asking a basketball player to suddenly play on ice or a sprinter to run on sand. The fundamental biomechanics change. And Secretariat had never raced on turf. Never, not once. So when they brought him to Woodbine, with its soft turf course made even softer by rain and melting snow, there was genuine uncertainty. Would he handle it? Would his explosive cower translate to a different surface? Would his inexperience cause problems? The answer came quickly. He handled it perfectly. Better than perfectly. He dominated on it. His first move on turf, that devastating backstretch acceleration that opened 12 lengths. His response to the soggy conditions, like he'd been running on grass his entire life. His adjustment to the different stride requirements, seamless. This is what separates transcendent athletes from merely great ones, the ability to adapt to new circumstances and still dominate. Secretariat didn't just handle the turf, he conquered it. He made it look like his natural surface. Training partners later said he'd worked on turf in morning workouts, and his handlers had been impressed. But workouts aren't races. The pressure is different. The competition is different. This was his first competitive test on grass, and he passed with flying colors. What this demonstrated was the depth of his athletic ability. He wasn't just optimized for one specific scenario. He was a complete racehorse who could excel regardless of conditions. Dirt or turf, fast track or sloppy, perfect weather or miserable cold and rain, it didn't matter. The tremendous machine adapted and dominated. This versatility is rare. Most champions have preferred conditions, surfaces they love and surfaces they tolerate. Secretariat simply loved running, and he was equally magnificent wherever you put him. The soggy turf at Woodbine that day could have been an excuse, could have been a reason for a subpar performance, could have been the factor that prevented a dominant farewell. Instead, it became another example of his greatness, another data point proving he was simply better than everything else on any surface, under any conditions. A tremendous machine indeed, one that worked equally well on any terrain. The unfamiliar surface was challenging enough, but the weather conditions that day, they were downright brutal. Number 4. Weather from the north. Picture this. You're watching the greatest racehorse in the world compete in his final race. You're imagining perfect conditions, sunny skies, comfortable temperature, the kind of beautiful day that makes outdoor sporting events memorable. Instead, you got October in Toronto at its worst. The day was cold, windy, and miserable, with light snow flurries and drizzle, a stark contrast to his sunny Triple Crown victories. Temperature in the low 40s Fahrenheit, wind chill making it feel like the 30s, snow mixing with freezing rain, wind gusting hard enough to make standing uncomfortable. This was not racing weather. This was stay inside and watch from the window weather. And 35,000 people showed up anyway. Let's talk about what those conditions meant for the horses. Cold muscles don't perform optimally. They're tighter, more prone to injury, slower to respond. Wet tracks, especially turf, are unpredictable. Footing can be treacherous. One misstep can mean disaster. Wind affects balance and breathing. Strong gusts can push horses off stride or make aerodynamics work against them. Snow and rain obscure vision for both horses and jockeys. These are the conditions where races get canceled, where trainers scratch their horses to avoid unnecessary risk, where everyone agrees that discretion is the better part of valor. But this was Secretariat's farewell. The show had to go on. And the contrast with his Triple Crown glory days was almost poetic in its starkness. The Kentucky Derby, warm spring afternoon, clear skies, 134,476 fans in short sleeves and sunglasses. The Preakness, beautiful May weather, perfect racing conditions. The Belmont, warm June day, ideal for the performance of a lifetime. The Canadian International, snow, wind, freezing rain, misery. It's like the universe was testing him one final time, saying, "You've proven yourself in perfect conditions, but can you do it when everything is working against you?" And Secretariat answered with that dominant 6.5-length victory. The cold didn't slow him down. The wet turf didn't compromise his footing. The wind didn't affect his stride. He ran like it was a perfect spring day, like the conditions were ideal instead of miserable. The fans who braved that weather, they're the real heroes of this story. They stood in snow and freezing rain for hours. They paid admission to be uncomfortable. They sacrificed warmth and comfort for the privilege of watching one horse run one race. Why? because they understood this was history. This was the final chapter of an incredible story, and some moments are worth being cold and wet for. One fan, interviewed years later, said, "I couldn't feel my feet by the end of the race, but I also couldn't stop crying. It was the most miserable and most beautiful experience of my life." That's the power of sport at its highest level. It transcends comfort. It transcends convenience. Those 35,000 people in the Canadian cold, they got to tell their grandchildren, "I was there. I saw Secretariat's final race. And yes, it was snowing. And yes, it was worth it." The weather from the north provided the perfect metaphor. Even when conditions are harsh, even when everything is working against you, greatness finds a way. Secretariat found a way.
Brutal conditions, unfamiliar surface, and one more wrinkle that added complexity to an already challenging situation.
Number 3. A new jockey. Imagine being Eddie Maple on October 27, 1973. You get the call. You're riding Secretariat tomorrow, his final race. Don't mess it up. No pressure, right? Due to regular jockey Ron Turcotte being under a 5-day suspension in New York, Eddie Maple was tasked with riding the champ in his final start. This is both an incredible honor and a terrifying responsibility. Ron Turcotte had been Secretariat's pilot through the entire Triple Crown. He knew the horse intimately, knew his quirks, his preferences, his tendencies, knew exactly when to ask, when to wait, when to just stay out of the way. They'd developed a partnership over dozens of races, an understanding that goes beyond technique into something almost telepathic. And Eddie Maple had one race, one chance, one opportunity to get it right. Now, Eddie Maple wasn't some inexperienced apprentice. He was a skilled, accomplished jockey who'd won major races and ridden top horses. But this was Secretariat, the greatest racehorse anyone had seen in a generation. The horse every racing fan in North America knew by name. And the weight of expectation was enormous. If he won, people would say, "Of course he won. It's Secretariat. Anyone could have ridden him to victory." If he lost, people would say, "See, Ron Turcotte was irreplaceable, should have waited for him. Win-win for Secretariat, lose-lose for Maple." Except Eddie Maple didn't see it that way. Years later, he described the opportunity as the single greatest honor of my career. "I got to ride the greatest horse in the world in his final race," Maple said. How many jockeys can say that? How many people get that privilege? The night before the race, Eddie Maple barely slept. Not from nerves exactly, but from the weight of the moment. He studied films of Secretariat's races. He talked with Lucien Laurent about the horse's preferences. He prepared mentally for every possible scenario. And when he finally sat on Secretariat's back in the paddock before the race, he felt it immediately. "The power," he said. "Even just walking to the track, you could feel it. This horse was different. This horse was special." The race itself, as we've discussed, went perfectly. Maple made the right decisions, trusted the horse, and delivered a dominant victory. But here's what I find remarkable. Ron Turcotte, watching from the sidelines, wasn't bitter or jealous. He was proud that his horse, because he still thought of Secretariat as his horse, had finished his career with a victory. Proud that Eddie Maple had respected the magnitude of the moment. Proud that the story ended the right way. After the race, Turcotte sought out Maple and said simply, "You rode him perfectly. Thank you." That's class. That's sportsmanship. That's understanding that some moments are bigger than personal glory. For Eddie Maple, that validation from the horse's regular jockey meant everything. He'd stepped into an impossible situation, replacing an irreplaceable partner, and handled it with grace, skill, and respect for what came before. One race, one jockey change, and one opportunity to either enhance or tarnish a legend. Eddie Maple rose to the occasion. And in doing so, he earned his own small place in Secretariat's story. The new jockey handled the change admirably, but the biggest change of all wasn't who was riding, it was what they were riding on. Number 2. Unfamiliar territory. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the grass under the hooves. This was Secretariat's first and only race on turf. Not just his first turf race of the season, not his first turf race in a while, his first and only ever. Every other race in his career, every single one, had been on dirt, and now, for his farewell performance, they were asking him to compete on a completely different surface. Why? The Canadian International was and is a turf race. That's its identity, its tradition. Woodbine's turf course was renowned as one of the best in North America. If Secretariat was going to race in Canada, this was the marquee event, the race that would attract the crowd, generate the attention, and provide the proper stage for a champion's farewell. But it meant taking a calculated risk, putting a dirt specialist on grass for the first time in competition. Some trainers would have refused. Too much uncertainty, too much potential for disaster. Why risk the perfect send-off on unfamiliar terrain? But Lucien Laurin trusted his horse, and Penny Chenery trusted her team. They'd worked Secretariat on turf in morning training. He'd handled it well, more than well. He'd seemed to enjoy it. The decision was made. They'd run in the Canadian International, on turf, and trust that greatness would translate across surfaces. Here's what makes this decision even more remarkable. Turf racing requires different skills than dirt racing. On dirt, explosive speed is paramount. Power, acceleration, the ability to dig in and push off hard. On turf, balance becomes more critical. Stride efficiency, the ability to handle slight undulations and changes in footing. These are skills horses develop over time across multiple turf races, learning the nuances and adjustments needed. Secretariat got one race, one opportunity to figure it out in real time, and he didn't just figure it out, he mastered it. That devastating backstretch move, that's not beginner's luck. That's an athlete with such natural ability that he can adapt to new circumstances instantly. The comfortable hand ride to the finish, that's not a horse struggling with unfamiliar terrain. That's a horse completely at ease. The 6.5 length margin, that's not good considering the circumstances. That's dominant by any standard. Experts who watched that race came away convinced that if Secretariat had raced regularly on turf, he would have been just as dominant as he was on dirt. The surface didn't matter. The conditions didn't matter. His greatness was transferable. Think about what that means. Most horses are specialists. They find their niche, sprint or distance, dirt or turf, specific track configurations, and excel there. Secretariat appeared to have no limits. Put him anywhere, under any conditions, and he'd figure out how to be the best. His first and only turf race produced a dominant victory against quality competition on a soft course in terrible weather with an unfamiliar jockey. If that's what he could do the first time on grass, imagine what he might have accomplished with experience. We never got to find out. This was his goodbye, one and done. But that single turf performance stands as evidence of something profound. Secretariat's greatness wasn't circumstantial, it was fundamental. Change the surface, change the weather, change the jockey, change the country. It didn't matter. The horse remained the horse. The champion remained the champion. Unfamiliar territory became familiar in a matter of minutes, because that's what true greatness does. It adapts, overcomes, and makes the extraordinary look routine. Secretariat's first turf race was his last turf race, and it was perfect. One race on turf, one farewell performance. And the decision to make this race his last was itself a story worth telling. Number 1. A farewell tour of champions. On October 28, 1973, in front of 35,117 fans, Big Red competed in his final career race. But here's the fact that deserves the #1 spot. Secretariat was opting for the Canadian International over a lucrative showdown in the United States. There was money on the table, lots of it. High-profile races with bigger purses, easier logistics, and guaranteed massive American television coverage. The Jockey Club Gold Cup at Belmont, the Woodward Stakes, other prestigious events that would have been the obvious choice for a final race. Instead, Penny Chenery chose Canada, chose a turf race, chose a farewell that prioritized meaning over money. This wasn't just a race, it was a statement about values. In an era where horse racing was becoming increasingly commercialized, where breeding rights and syndication deals were starting to overshadow the sport itself, Penny Chenery made a choice that put people before profit. She could have maximized Secretariat's final earnings, could have squeezed every possible dollar from his last appearance. Instead, she honored the Canadians who'd been instrumental in his success. She gave Canadian racing fans a gift. She chose loyalty and gratitude over financial optimization. That's the kind of decision that defines character. And the 35,117 people who showed up in that miserable weather, they recognized what they were witnessing. This wasn't just another race, this was a farewell. Farewells matter. In sports, in life, in any endeavor where excellence has graced us with its presence. The athletes who get proper farewells, who get to choose when and how they exit, those are the lucky ones. Think about how many great athletes have their careers end abruptly. Injury, decline, being forced out before they're ready. Secretariat got to go out on top, after a victory, in front of fans who loved him, with his team by his side, on his own terms. That's rare. That's special. That's the kind of ending every champion deserves, but few receive. And the fact that this farewell happened in Canada, honoring the Canadian connections who'd been crucial to his success, that elevated it from a simple goodbye to something more meaningful. A thank you, an acknowledgement, a recognition that success is collaborative and that everyone who contributes deserves to share in the glory. The 35,117 fans in attendance that day, they're part of racing history now. They can say they were there. They witnessed the farewell. They stood in the snow and cold to pay tribute to greatness one final time. And Secretariat, being Secretariat, gave them a performance worthy of the moment. He didn't just win, he dominated. He ran like he had something to prove, even though everything had already been proven. He reminded everyone why they'd fallen in love with him in the first place, why he'd captured imaginations and transcended his sport, why his story would be told for generations. The farewell tour of champions isn't about victory. Victory was expected, almost guaranteed. It was about the manner of victory, the grace, the respect for the moment, the understanding that this was about more than just one horse running one race. This was closure. This was ceremony. This was the proper ending to an extraordinary story. 35,117 people. In snow and freezing rain to watch one horse run one final time. That's not just attendance, that's pilgrimage, that's devotion, that's recognition that they were in the presence of something they'd never see again. And Secretariat rewarded their faith, delivered the performance they'd hoped for, gave them a memory they'd carry forever. October 28, 1973. The day Secretariat said goodbye, the day racing lost its greatest active champion, the day a legend became history, and the day 35,117 people witnessed perfection one last time. And there you have it, 15 facts about Secretariat's final race that hopefully gave you chills, or at least a deeper appreciation for what that day meant. From the somber farewell to the joyful posing in the winner's circle, from the crowd literally running onto the track to the final earnings that cemented his financial legacy, from the gentle hand ride to the explosive backstretch takeoff, from honoring his Canadian connections to creating that iconic, tremendous machine image, from dominating while being restrained to responding to just a cluck from his jockey, from conquering unfamiliar turf to battling brutal weather conditions, from adapting to a new jockey to running his first and only race on grass, and finally, from choosing meaning over money in a farewell that honored everyone who made his greatness possible. Each of these facts tells part of the story. Together, they paint a picture of a champion who was more than just fast, more than just a record breaker, more than just a horse race. Secretariat was a phenomenon, a cultural icon, a living embodiment of excellence that transcended his sport and touched people who'd never watched a horse race before. And his final race was the perfect encapsulation of everything he represented: power, grace, dominance, and respect. If this video moved you, helped you appreciate Secretariat's story more deeply, or taught you something new, please hit that subscribe button. We're dedicated to preserving these racing stories, honoring these legends, and sharing the history of this beautiful sport with people who truly care. Drop a comment telling me which fact surprised you most. Was it the crowd rushing the track, the single cluck that unleashed thunder, the choice to honor his Canadian connections? Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about these stories. Thank you for keeping racing history alive. I'll see you in the next video.